Hello everyone and welcome to We Go Back. I'm your host Bryan Abou Chacra, and on this week's episode we will be reviewing In Translation and Numbers, the 17th and 18th episode from Season 1 of Lost. Going right into In Translation, this is a Jin-centered episode. We're going to see it all from his perspective, which is really cool because I was thinking back to House of the Rising Sun and realizing that episode featured Jin, but it was mainly focused on Sun's perspective. So this time we actually get to see an event that occurred from Sun's perspective now through Jin. So that's going to be really cool when we get to that. So the first thing that we see that I want to talk about is the interaction with Jin and Sun's father. He's asking for permission to get her hand in marriage, and Mr. Paik kind of just doesn't care that he's there, and he's very strange about his interaction, like cold and standoffish. But I think he sees an opportunity to find this person or to see how far he can go. And because, Jin, as we've seen so far, is very honor-based, and we see more of that here, he wants to earn the respect of Sun's father as well, not just get his, approval, but his respect. So he's willing to do whatever it takes because to him, Sun is his dream, and that is his ultimate goal, and that's what he's going to fight for. And that's the point that we see here. And all of this, what we're seeing is Jin and how he really feels about Sun, not what we've seen so far. This episode is really cool, especially going back to the seeing, from different perspectives, Sun and Jin. We get to see that Jin is a very different person, and our perception of him has been very skewed because we didn't really have a lot of information on him before now. So that's really cool to see that and to see it come to have that explanation and to come to a different conclusion from it. It's really, really interesting. So we then see what that translates to when Jin sees Sun on the beach with her swimming suit on. She's going to go in there, and he tries to cover her up, and it cuts. One of the emails I got to actually mention this and pointed out. It cuts to 3 different couples in the beach, and those are more kind of Western couples compared to the traditional, very conservative couple that Sun and Jin are. So it's really interesting to see it. Michael comes in to try to help and gets slapped for it. Very, very interesting because that leads Jin to suspect Sun of cheating, which I think is really funny. That ends up being something that we'll talk a lot down the line about. In the flashback, we go back to the wedding day, or maybe the ceremony after the wedding. And I wanted to point out when Jin enters the room that Sun is in, and her friend leaves, behind it we can see a statue of some Buddhist symbol. I tried to look it up to find out the exact name and find out about it, but it was really hard to without knowing anything already. But I'm pretty sure that isn't Buddha. That's one of the sub-gods or something like that. Please, if somebody knows, write in, let me know what that is, because I would love to share it with you guys. I was trying to find more information kind of quickly, but yeah, please let me know if you guys know a little bit more about the different deities in Buddhist theology, because that'd be really cool to see if that has any connection to this episode. A lot of stuff will have little bits of kind of connections to the episode. So far, we have 2 philosophers, Rousseau and John Locke. Look up their philosophies and see if that kind of matches into these characters, because it's very interesting that they went with that. And considering so far, we've seen different theologies and different ideas, Jack kind of being a man of science, and then the different types of faiths that are there. It's cool that they're also including philosophies in the show as part of a theme. It's not just the idea of theism or religion traditionally, but maybe philosophies is different ways of living life. So very, very interesting. This episode was really heavy, I think, with a lot of cool behind the scenes stuff that I'm really excited to talk about. So we then get the explanation that Sun was trying to protect Michael when she slapped him for getting involved, which is actually what I had thought the first time. It's like, well, what's she have to do for her honor? If she fights with her husband, that's going to make her husband look bad. And she doesn't want to do that. She just wants to go to the beach. So she slaps Michael because her duty is to her husband. And that is kind of what she's expressing there. But also she says to protect him because we see that she's seen some of what Jin is capable of, or maybe has an insight onto what kind of person her father is and what kind of jobs he's having her husband do. Either way, she knows that Jin is capable of doing pretty terrible stuff. So she's trying to prevent Michael having to be involved in any of that. Which then cuts to Hurley, who finds Jin playing golf, I think with rocks, and recommends that he uses sea urchin, which is not a thing I picked up on the first time I watched this show, but I think it's really cool that they have that come back up between them, because sea urchin was the thing that Jin tried to get Hurley to try on the beach the first day, and now Hurley's recommending sea urchin to Jin. And I think it's really cool. We now see, again, Hurley can't even communicate with this guy. He even tries, I think, speaking Spanish to him at some point. But he's trying to see where this guy's at emotionally. He can tell tensions are high. And he knows that they can't communicate to Jin or his wife or likewise. So he's trying to just cheer him up because he sees that he's not in a good place right now. And I thought that's very interesting. We've now seen Hurley continue to be supportive emotionally for everybody in the show that he's encountered who's in a bad way. Very, very interesting, and I wanted to point that out to you. A fun little point that I had at this point, I hate when I say that, but let's roll with it. The people now want to all wonder who's going to get on the raft. And whatever it was 2-3 episodes ago, nobody thought that was a good idea. Everybody was saying that it's stupid, we got to build a raft. And now people want to get on that raft. It's pretty funny how when things are just an idea, people are like, oh, no, that's stupid. But then it's starting to come up, and all of a sudden, oh, no, I want to be on the raft. Man, you don't get to be on no raft for nothing. Which is how Sawyer gets on the raft, because he wants to be there and buys his way on. And I think that's pretty funny that he's now on board, but he knows that it's going to take, there's a give and take here. I want to be on your raft. Let me give you something. And he gets on the raft. But boom, just as fast as it's coming together, the raft is now on fire. Everybody's running, trying to put the fire out. And I had a very interesting realization here when I noticed that the camera lingered on Locke for a second, as if he knew something about what was going on. Thought it was really interesting. That comes back in at the end of the episode. We cut to Jin in the caves with his hands that are hurt. They're obviously burned. He's upset that his wife is there and accusing him that he is the one who set the fire. So he runs off, doesn't explain anything, and leaves her alone. Which takes us to our flashback of Jin being asked to deliver a message by Sun's father. And we see in this instance and in this request the innocence, actually, of Jin. When he's told that he is to deliver this message, he's told to say that Mr. Paik is very displeased with the, I think, councilman's decision. And so Jin goes to deliver exactly that message. We see that when he actually confronts the guy, he does exactly that. He says that Mr. Paik is very displeased with you, but the other guy sees what was actually supposed to happen. We see the fear in his eyes. He tries to be very, apologetic, and we now see that the dog came from this councilman's child and all of this stuff. So it's really interesting, the perspective. Again, Mr. Paik knew exactly what he wanted from Jin. Jin's perspective was, okay, I'm working for an honorable company. This is a great place to work at. It's a very well-known company, and I'm going to go deliver this message exactly the way he says it. Really, really interesting that we see he was pushed to this and made this way because of his circumstance. And a little interesting point that I believe one of my emails also noticed is that Hurley is actually on the TV that is in the councilman's home. The woman the daughter is watching Hurley on TV. And at this point, we don't know why, but we find out in the next episode it's pretty big. Not because it's Hurley and he's a big guy. Come on, guys. Come on. But we find out that that's also where the dog came from, like I said. So next, I want to move on to an interaction with Boone and Saeed on the beach, where Saeed comes to tell Boone of his intentions to be courteous and tell her family that he intends to be more involved with her. because he also feels like that's the honorable thing to do, that she's there with somebody and he should go tell him. And Boone warns Saeed about Shannon in this scene. And I thought it was kind of interesting that he did it again, but I think it was interesting to see his perspective change now. His tone was very different. His attitude was very different of Boone's in the way that he expressed why he didn't think Saeed should pursue Shannon. It seemed less selfish. It seemed more to do with, hey, this is the type of woman that she is. These are the types of things that she's done to other men like you. I want you to know that, and don't take it personally if that happens to you. Just let you know. Which, of course, makes Shannon upset when she finds out from Saeed that this has happened. She goes and confronts Locke about it to try to find Boone, but Locke actually puts her up to a very interesting task. And he tells her about everyone gets a new life here on the island. Forget Boone. You're playing right into his hand. That's what you want, and you're continuing the cycle. Then that's what you're going to keep getting. But you have the chance to be a different person here. You should embrace that chance. A very interesting message for somebody like Shannon, who maybe has never been told that before. Or, like we've seen, she just keeps taking what she wants, but she's slowly starting to change and open up and be warm. And again, we see that encouragement coming from Locke. This idea of leaving what you had in the past, growing and developing your new person here on this island. This place has been a gift so far to Locke. He has no reason not to believe that other people could benefit just like he did, because he was open. So, once again, Locke nudging people in the right direction. We then go to a flashback of Sun, who's made dinner for Jin, and we find out this is actually earlier in the night from Sun's episode, where she had, yelled at Jin for coming back home bloodied. And very interesting to see part of why she was so angry. He left dinner, he comes back covered in blood. What does he do for her father? Who is this man? This isn't the man that she had married, this gentle, innocent person who seemed so unloved, and she was his dream, and now he's this person who does dirty work for her father. And it's solidified, I think, by the interaction that Jin has once he goes and sees Mr. Paik and is then told, you didn't deliver the message that I told you to deliver, that I expected you to deliver. You are the reason that now my factory is closed and we are losing money. And this guy's very hard-assed. And he says, you're going to drive this guy here. He's going to do what you couldn't. He's going to deliver this message. And we now see the extremity between what was expected from Mr. Paik and what was delivered. Because this guy's getting a gun ready. He's got gloves on. It's all very down to it. This is exactly what's going to happen, and this guy is not going to end up in a good place if the associate gets his hands on him. This guy's an assassin. An interesting point that I noticed here: when the message is delivered by Jin is wearing an all-black suit. The assassin is wearing an all-white suit. This is something I think I'm going to start paying attention to more as I'm watching Lost. Is that dynamic? I know it was always there. I just didn't see how deep it was embedded into the show. Something like that. Again, people don't just turn on a camera and go, all right, film whatever. Everything is staged. This is all a set. It's probably a hotel room or something like that, and it's all meant to look a certain way. So it's not an accident that Jin is wearing all black and that this guy is wearing all white. And it could be, again, in this instance, I'm pretty sure the guy's shirt is white, or Jin's shirt is white with a black tie, and then the other guy's wearing a black shirt with a white tie. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure his shirt is black, which, if you think about it, looks like what kind of symbol? The yin-yang symbol. Not the twins. We're not doing whisper songs. This isn't ASMR. But think about that. It's the same little bit of black in white, little bit of white in black. The two come together. Never really picked up on that until I was talking about it just right now. Really, really interesting. I hope that was intentional. I hope it was, because that's a really cool point if it was. Man, that's cool. Anyway, so we move along on our little journey, and it comes back to the scene that we have already seen from Sun's backstory, where Jin comes in and he's in a bloodied mess, and he tells her, I do what your father tells me to do. And in this moment, we don't see that he's an evil man. We see a man who's now broken down. He's crying in the sink because of what happened after son left him in the bathroom. We now see from his perspective, he's in there and he's distraught. He just beat the shit out of a man to save his life because he realized that this other man with him, the assassin, was absolutely just going to kill him in front of his family. And he just saved the man's life. And he came back home, and his wife, who is the daughter of the man who forced him to do this, he's just angry about it. He's so pissed. I mean, I would be pissed if I just had to save somebody's life by beating their ass. So he's distraught. He's in a horrible place. And we can kind of start to see things from Jin's perspective, which is really interesting because I think shortly after, we now hear from Jin's perspective what all the people on the beach think when they see him. And they're all talking in gibberish. This is a complete opposite from what we saw in Sun's episode. In Sun's episode, we actually had her hearing other people, and this was sort of the tag, the key for us to recognize that she's able to understand English. In this point, he just hears it in nonsense, and we hear it with him in nonsense. So very interesting to have that balance between the two and that juxtaposition. But things get really heated here. They're all beating up on Jin. Michael gets involved and he starts going nuts on him. Jin keeps talking back, but we don't know what he's saying. Nobody's telling us. And it's revealed because Sun just yells to stop. She wants to save her husband's life. She doesn't want to see him get beat to death by this guy. And she explains, my husband's not a liar. She tells him all that he was trying to put out the fire and he would never do something like that. He is a good person. And we see that that is true. That rings true in this episode. We see that he is a good person in this episode. And that is what I believe she loves about him, is that he's a good person, but he's been twisted by the position he's been in life to not see things the way that he used to. And it's sort of sad. You're watching these people kind of break up. And it's really almost heartbreaking going back and watching it because you're like, man, I didn't realize how like tense and how bad it was getting between the two, that, you know, she loves him so much and he loved her. He was only living his life for her, only doing all of this for her. And now their life is absolutely abysmal. And Locke then drops the knowledge that we need to stop fighting within each other. There are people out there who have killed us. There are people out there who have sabotaged us. And now we're looking at each other still as the cause for our own error. We all want to get off this island. We all want to protect ourselves. John says we're not the only people on this island, and we all know it. And they're all pretending like, oh yeah, it must have been Jin. It must have been Jin, just because they have problems, because people are jumping to conclusions. Michael's going off on the handle. He's had a problem with me since day one. It's like, the problem wasn't with you. It was the watch. It wasn't the fact that you were there and you're Michael. No. So let's use some logic. And Locke kind of drops that in there. He's like, why would he, okay, if he has a personal issue with you, why would he burn this raft? It has nothing to do with you. You're trying to get off the island. If he wanted to, you know, deal with you about this issue, then he would have probably found a different way. In the case that we see, he would have probably just fought Michael. But no, he wouldn't have burned the raft. Why would he do that? Nobody wants to be stuck on a deserted island. Come on. Especially with one that has people on it that kill them. So it's a very interesting part, and it's a really cool point because we don't see John at this point really address the group very often. And when he does, it's been very reasonable. So I think it's a very good thing to pay attention to and see what his motives and his intentions are. Moving along, we come to the scene with Michael and his son. They're at the raft. He's trying to salvage what he can and is getting pissed. And in that anger and frustration for all of the work that he's done going down in flames, literally, we see a connection between Michael and his son. They keep getting closer and closer together. Walt offers to help his father rebuild the boat, and Michael is really happy that he's able to continue to connect with his son, because before his son was reluctant, now his son is engaged. Cutting back to the caves, we have Sun confessing in English to Jin about what she was going to do. She was going to leave him. She was done. She didn't see the man that she fell in love with anymore. And it's heartbreaking. This scene is so heart-wrenching. They shot it and it acted so well. She just wants that man that she loves, and he wants the woman that he loves, but I don't think that they can communicate on that level anymore. Everything has just gone horribly wrong for both of them, and that's why she asks for a new start. But Jin, I don't know if it's honor or being stubborn or whatever, seems like it's not an option. He says it's too late, and walks off, goes to the beach and leaves her in the caves. And very sad moment is then perpetuated by the next scene, where we find out that Jin's father is actually not dead, and that his son in shame has lied to people, telling them that his father is dead, because his father is a man who works with his hands and is a fisherman and has done nothing else but become a fisherman. And his son was more ambitious. He wanted to do more, but in Jin's honor, because I can't speak about Korean culture at all. I can't tell you if it's, people who work in with their hands don't have the same opportunities. I really can't say that. I've been told that, so I'm pretty sure this type of society is like that. I mean, typically, a lot of societies, like I know in my culture, if you work with your hands, it's considered to be like a lesser job than somebody like a doctor or a businessman or an executive, because you're working with your hands instead of working with your mind. So I'm assuming that that's the case here. And Jin is he wants to be an honorable, strong person. He's so devout to this cause, but that means setting aside things. So that's really all just to say that he did make a new start. He set aside his father. He set aside his past. He shunned it all and made a new start so that he could be with Sun. So it's possible for him to have a new start. I think that that's a really interesting point, because his father says it to him, and it's the only good advice we've seen a father give to anybody so far. I mean, in this show, we've seen so many issues with relationships with parents. It's crazy. We see it with Jack. We've seen it with Sawyer. We've seen it with Locke. Locke says that he had a horrible father, as later in the episode when he's talking with Walt. And so we're seeing this issue. I mean, in this episode, we see Mr. Peck, Sun's father. Maybe they have a dissonance. I don't know. Or a disconnection. I'm not sure. But we obviously haven't seen them together so far, and we've seen the kind of person he is. So it's possible in this case, and we can expect that. But now here's another issue. We have a man who is ashamed of his father. Really, really interesting. Michael and Walt, same sort of thing. People having issues with their parental figure. So we're going to look that up as we go along, paying more attention to that too. So that takes us to our present day time on the beach. Shen embraces her new life and goes off with Saeed. That's really nice. I think it was a cool little romance that they built over the past few weeks. Felt it was a really, really nice payoff to that. And now we find that Chen isn't nearly as annoying as she used to be. So it's a really nice little bow on that person and their relationship. It was nice to see something so beautiful start in the midst of all of this like breakup of Sun and Jin. And that was a pretty interesting juxtaposition that I also wanted to point out to you guys. So Jin comes to the beach and wants to help Michael build the boat. He wants to be there. I think he feels by his honor, because he was accused and had maybe brought himself to this point. This is his atonement. This is how he will make up for the type of person he's been so far to Michael. He's going to help him build this boat and to prove to him that it wasn't he who burned the boat down. And they go off and they build this boat together. An interesting little out to this episode. Last little point is we see Hurley sitting on the beach, listen to CDs, and the battery dies, which I thought was a really nice toss, because watching these in little 2-episode bursts, it feels like they're supposed to be tied together, like you're supposed to watch them 2 episodes at a time. But I think that just really shows how good the writing is on Lost, especially in this first season, that things will pop up in the next episode that happened directly in the previous. And it makes it feel more cohesive. I think that's part of what makes it so easy to continue to watch, because you get payoffs really quick. Yeah, there's a lot of like mysteries, like there's long arc mysteries, but then there are also things that kind of like get tied up really nicely as the show goes along. It's a hallmark of good writing. If everything is just open, then all you're doing is writing on the what if, and that's a horrible show. And people only watch it if they don't know what it is. And this is why I've watched Lost so many times, because I do know what it is, and even though there are cliffhangers and things like that, I still get excited to see what the payoff is for those, because they've been set up so well. That's why you go back and you watch your favorite movies and you watch your favorite shows over and over again, because you can relive that gratification. But when something is hollow and it's only twists and turns and cliffhangers for the sake of doing that, it's a soap opera. That's it. And it runs for 40 years and there's no substance. I mean, nobody cares that Bo and Hope are still together, right? So anyway, that takes us to the end of this episode, moves us on to Numbers, the 18th episode. This episode focuses more on Hurley, which is really cool because I love learning more about this guy. I think this is actually the first time that we've seen a flashback for Hurley, which is pretty interesting. It takes us 18 episodes to get in there. So let's not waste any time. At the beginning of this episode, we find out that Hurley is helping rebuild the raft and suggests to Michael, who's looking to find a way to transmit a signal from the boat, that the French woman actually had some batteries. So they go talk to Saeed, and he is very reluctant to help them. But in this moment, Hurley picks up the notes and the maps and all the papers and finds a page with just the same numbers written over and over. And that ties directly into the next scene, where we find out that those numbers were the winning numbers for a huge record-setting jackpot lottery that Hurley happened to win. So Hurley, who has up until this point, I don't know if you've been paying attention to the little, comments he's been making, like to Walt and betting real money. Apparently, he's good for that money. He's a lottery winner and he's got a lot for it. So Hurley is now motivated to go try to find Rousseau. He goes and talks to Saeed in the caves, tries to figure out where she is, gets a map, and sets out on a journey the next day to go try to find Rousseau. And an interesting point here, this shot where Hurley's walking across the beach and cuts over to him taking his mom to the new house. There's a song that plays here that I've been trying to find for years. Apparently, it was only created for the show. That's the only research I've been able to find. When I was at the Lost concert, I was going to ask Michael Giacchino where that song came from, but I never got the chance to get the mic and ask the question. But if you guys know, please write me in wegobackpodcast@gmail.com and let me know if I can find that somewhere. Is that a real artist, or is it really just created for the show? It sounds like a fun song, but that is something I've always wondered. And I really, if you guys ever get to talk to Michael Giacchino at a panel or something like that, ask him that question. I don't think he's ever been asked that in his life. And if he has, I'd be very, very surprised. But through this little transition and this song, we see that a string of horrible things have happened to Hurley since he's winning the lottery. His house burned down, his brother's wife left him, his mom's ankle breaks, his grandpa dies, and then he gets arrested, all before he comes to the island, and it all is because he believes it's because of these numbers. And an interesting scene where Hurley is at his accountant or his financial advisor and talking to him in his office, his advisor says that he did just purchase a box company in Tustin, and that is absolutely the box company that John Locke works at. Just want to make sure that you guys paid attention to that if you didn't. Next thing that his accountant says, and I think it's really funny, is that he believes in the numbers. And he believes in numbers, which of course, yes, that's the name of this show, but it's interesting to see that Hurley is also believing that these numbers cause bad luck. This guy just believes that numbers are fact and have no correlation to anything else. But Hurley absolutely believes that bad luck has come because of these numbers, and he needs to get to the bottom of it. Another little point back at the beach that I wanted to make sure that you guys paid attention to, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in the email section because I got a write-in about it too, is the book that Sawyer is reading. I'll always try to point out the books and stuff, media and stuff in the background that I see so that you guys can go research it yourself. Sawyer is reading a book called A Wrinkle in Time. Like I said, I'll get back to that in the emails. So moving along to Hurley out in the woods by himself trying to find Rousseau, which must be hilarious looking, steps on a trap and they all catch up to him. Hurley, being very spry, avoids the trap. Very, very interesting considering that he thinks the numbers are bad luck, but he was able to avoid a trap. Interesting perspective there. I don't think he's focused on the wrong things. He's focused on all the bad things that have happened to him since he's been, he's been a lottery winner, but he's able to do certain things. He just survived a plane crash too. There's a whole bunch of actual reasons of him not being necessarily in bad luck, and it really ties into the theme of this episode a lot, because we find out that everything is happening to Hurley has been horrible, but I think the point is to really kind of guide you to see that it's his perception of what's happening to him. And we'll dive deeper into that as we go along, and there are a few emails about it that I think you guys will find really interesting. So we continue to follow Hurley on this journey to the psych ward that he used to be at. The doctor talks to him, remembers him. A little subtle hint there that they're telling you that he's been there before as a patient. They don't remember him being friends with Leonard, this guy who apparently has just been sitting there mumbling to himself for who knows how many years. Hurley sits down and confronts him and asks him about the numbers. Guy doesn't seem to care. Reveals that he used those numbers to win the lottery, and this drives this guy to stop chanting what he used to do. Finds out that these numbers came from a guy named Sam Toomey who's in Australia. Now we know why Hurley's in Australia too. What got him there? These numbers and trying to find this guy, Sam Toomey, and figure out the origin of where these came from. So back on Hurley's expedition to try to find Rousseau, they've come up to a very old, rickety looking rope bridge. And Hurley, with all of the momentum in the world to try to find, and motivation in the world to try to find Rousseau, crosses this bridge that looks like it's about to break. And come on, he's a big dude, and he's going to cross this bridge that looks very unsafe, and he makes it across without any incident. Interestingly enough, following him shortly after is Charlie, making the same comment that I'm making, that if he can make it across, then Charlie can. But when Charlie goes across, the bridge breaks. Which brings up a very interesting point. I told you guys before that I'm always going to try to pay attention to the times that Charlie has nearly died. He was hung up in a tree, and he basically died. This is now the fourth time I believe that we've seen Charlie almost die because of something on the island. Hurley makes it across. He believes he has bad luck. Charlie has almost died 4 times, more than any other character in the show. Moving back to Hurley trying to find Sam in Australia, we see that Sam is no longer alive, and Hurley meets Sam's wife. She tells him that the numbers came from a transmission that he picked up 16 years ago. So you got to think, the crash was maybe I think a month ago at this point. 16 years ago, he heard those numbers transmitted. Wonder where those came from. 16 years. Transmissions. I wonder. Oh, we will get into it. It is Danielle. We find that out later in this episode. She heard the same transmission, and that's what brought her to the island. Those numbers, just like Hurley, brought her to the island. Very, very cool. What an interesting connection for these two to have. Especially because we find out that really what Hurley was looking for is just a little bit of compassion. Everybody kept telling him he's crazy for believing it, but because he was brought to this island just like Danielle by these numbers, they are able to feel vindicated, or he's able to feel very relieved, because now he's not the only person who feels like these numbers have more of a significance than just some numbers a guy picked. And that, I think, is the point of Hurley's issue, of why people calling him crazy really bothered him, because he didn't believe that the numbers were only just random numbers. He thought they had a meaning, and he thought that they had something behind them. He gets that with Danielle, and it's really cool. But the other side of this episode is the one that Sam's wife explains to Charlie about making your own luck. I mean, we've seen instances in this episode of how Hurley has pretty good luck. I mean, yeah, he won the lottery and a few things bad happened to him, but he survived a plane crash. That's not bad luck. Yeah, the plane went down, but you couldn't get worse than death. You know, making your own luck is just kind of being able to take control of the situation, to have choices, not looking for an excuse. And that's what she's talking about in this episode. I think it's really interesting, and it's something that becomes a strong theme from this point on about making your own luck. So one thing I wanted to point out is the range of emotions we get to see from Hurley in this episode. So far, Hurley's been pretty subdued, laid back, really chill, and, you know, kind of the comic relief for the survivors so far, and for us as the viewers. But in this episode, we really get to see him struggle through a lot. It's the first time we ever see him really get angry when he's yelling at Rousseau about wanting answers. He's so passionate and so pushed to the limit because of all of this that he's gone through up until this point. And now that he's on this island and it somehow has a connection to these numbers, he's just so full of emotion. And we get to see so much from this character here. I think it's really interesting, and it's really fun. Hurley episodes are always fun because you get to see something very different. And Lost gets the chance to kind of go outside of what it normally does and kind of do little bits and sketches. Like they can do like a little comedy routine or do something a little more like a bank heist scene. And it gives you this wide range and more really versatile show to watch. And I think that's what kept me engaged. And as I'm watching it again, I'm really appreciating all these like little mini productions in the flashbacks that really give you a totally different dynamic than the rest of the show. So pretty cool. We find out, you know, on the island or on the beach that it's Claire's birthday and that Locke's been helping to make her a crib, and apparently it's now her birthday gift. And she talks about, you know, not really sharing her birthday because, you know, what does it matter here on this island? Like, we all have a fresh start here. Doesn't matter if it's my birthday somewhere else. Like, this is where we are now. And I thought that was a really cool, nice little end to this episode. You know, a more quaint finish, especially considering the, you know, how intense the last two episodes have been emotionally. But yeah, you know, Hurley is really stuck on believing that the plane went down because of him, and we don't see that he's able to grow from that, but we get a lot of information about who Hurley is. I might have said Charlie like 1,000,000 times in this episode instead of Hurley. I get the two switched up 1,000,000 times. But anyway, you know, that takes us to our final shot of the episode, where we see that those numbers are actually stamped on the side of that hatch that Locke has been excavating for the last few months with Boone. And that is pretty intense. What do these numbers have significance with this island, with Hurley? What kind of things do we have in store? That is going to be the fun of continuing watching the show. Guys, thank you very much for writing in emails. I'm going to start with my buddy Scotty. He sent in an email about episode 18 numbers. He says, "This is a favorite of mine. I can relate to Hurley as a character. I believe that Lost is such a popular show as there are so many characters which increase the odds that most viewers can relate to at least one on the show. Is there a character from the first season, I know this cast expands as the seasons continue, that you relate to most? Rad podcast. I look forward to it every week. Thanks, Scott." Scott, thank you so much for your email. Appreciate the support. I would say I always felt like I was like Sawyer. So that would be my character that I related to most. But as I went along and as I'm watching it now, I'm also relating a little bit to Hurley on just trying to help other people around him be happy and be chill. That's something that I like to do. If you guys ever come out to game days or come meet me at any conventions, like, I love to get to know people and I love to kind of like make people have a good time. So come meet me. I feel like I'm like Hurley in that regard. Anyway, that takes us to Seth's email. He says, "Hey, love the show. It's a shame not more people write in. I agree. Email me, wegobackpodcast@gmail.com. Here are his thoughts. In translation, J.J. Abrams and Michael Giacchino Productions really like to have puns in the titles of episodes or soundtracks. This one, pretty obvious, lost in translation, which is relevant to Sun and Jin's story. That is true, and that is a good point. Yeah, this is obviously the show's lost in translation is a movie. Number 2, there's very subtle, but when Jin gets mad at Sun on the beach, it cuts to the other couples on the island for their reactions, which I thought was interesting. It shows very clearly the stark difference between American and Asian cultures. This was the email, so Seth, thank you for that. Moving on, 3, I was trying to find a reason why Michael is so involved with Sun, and I think it's as simple as the writers flirting with the idea of a romance between the two, which is pretty bold. It is true, actually, that they did really flirt with that idea. They thought about having Sun have an affair with Michael on the island, but I think they decided that it wasn't a good idea for the show. So that might be all it is. Otherwise, I just think that, they kind of had a connection to start on the island. He keeps going to her to look after his boy. He doesn't know why, but maybe that could be it too. But I think it really was mostly that they had peppered that in at the beginning and abandoned that idea. 4, this episode is when we finally learn that Jin is not an asshole. I think his backstory is very specific to him because we can relate to his honor and sacrifices, which are traditionally Asian qualities. If Jack or Boone had that same backstory, I don't think it would have worked. That's a very interesting point. I think you're very right. It would have worked, but it would have been very... They would have had to... they do that, and they have to totally retool it. It only would have worked for Jin, you're right. And then 5, in this episode, we see the falling out of romance with Jin and Sun and the creation of one with Saeed and Shannon. Also, Arab Brown side character gets the hottest girl on the show. Awesome. That was credit to Saif again for that. That is true. We see the creation of this couple while the other one is completely falling apart. Also, I don't know if Shannon is the hottest girl on the show. That's just me. I would have to say maybe Claire. But I think the hottest guy is probably Sawyer. The hottest dog is Vincent. Definitely go for Vincent. Anyways, moving on to numbers. One note here, he says, Hurley says to his mom, "You deserve something good for once." He says the same exact thing to the group a few episodes ago when they started playing golf. For him, this whole island thing has been another bound of bad luck. That's true. Very insightful. I really, really like your email, Seth. Continue writing them in. Great opinions. Appreciate it. We get an email from Omar now. During the flashback where Jin goes to a man's house to deliver a message on behalf of Mr. Pig, you can see Hurley on the TV at this house. I was wondering why Hurley would be on TV, but then I realized this must have taken place at a time when he won the lottery. Although, why would they show an American lottery ticket winner on Korean television? It might have actually been because he got arrested and had that whole fiasco with the police department that he was on TV. It might have also been that it was a record-winning or record-setting winning jackpot. But I think it might have also been that he he got arrested when his house burned down. Who knows? I think that's maybe a little stretch, but I think it's just, oh, there he is on TV, and it's interesting to see him in the background. It tells you kind of what the timeline of it is too. I think somebody once strung the whole show of Lost chronologically to when things were going down, or did some timelines. If you guys ever get a chance, you should check it out. And now our final email from Ryan. He says, "So pumped to be going back on this journey with you. All caught up. I just wanted to write you about what I focused on a lot this episode. So in numbers, it got me thinking. When I saw Jack's arm, I was wondering, what does that number 5 mean? Then I thought back to the pilot and his talk with Kate about the 5 seconds of fear. Do you think this has anything to do with it?" It might have been written in later, but honestly, those are just Matthew Fox's actual tattoos. So it has nothing else to do with anything in the show. It's just he happens to have a tattoo with a 5 on it. He goes on to talk about the symbol on Hurley's necklace. It's a Chinese symbol, and interestingly enough, that is the symbol for luck in Chinese. So that's pretty interesting. This episode, he points out, has a lot of numbers tied to the numbers. The show has actually had that since the beginning. If you look, Flight 815, that's part of the numbers 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42. They talk about how Claire is 8 months pregnant when they get to the island. And they allude to it in the show as well in this episode when she's talking to Locke. So the numbers have been around. You just have to pay attention to the episode. They're going to continue to be there, and they're hidden in the most interesting places. So yeah, very, very cool and very, very nice insight about this episode from Ryan. Guys, I'm so happy that you guys keep writing into me, that you guys keep listening, and that you guys keep supporting me on this journey. It's been a lot of fun. This episode is now coming to a close. Next week, we will be reviewing Deus Ex Machina and Do No Harm, which every time I look at keeps making me want to read it like Do No Ham. So next week, Deus Ex Machina and Do No Ham. Guys, if you want to email me, wegobackpodcast@gmail.com. Always love hearing what you guys have to say. Follow me on Twitter for any updates @KingLordBryan. And until next time, I'll see you guys.